Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel Learn Property Valuation with Dr. T. In this episode we're looking at a concept called surrender and renewal. So this is a situation that arises frequently in practice when a landlord and a tenant wish to negotiate the terms of an existing lease. So typically before the original term has expired, the tenants may want to surrender their existing unexpired term in return for a new lease. So it's just a form of securing the property for a longer period. And it is often on different terms, maybe a different rent or a longer term, or sometimes both. So the question for the valuer is usually whether the transaction is equitable. That means does each party receive fair consideration in this new agreement? We value what the tenant gives up, that's their existing leasehold interest, and then we compare it to what they gain under the new lease. So similarly, we also assess the landlord's position before and after. This topic connects closely to premium calculations. You should check that out in previous videos, and leasehold valuation, also check that out in previous videos. So the concepts all build into one another. Now at the end of this video, you should know how to approach the calculations for surrender and renewals, and in what scenarios they are used, and you should be able to identify the various scenarios in which they occur. Let's begin. The surrender and renewal is a very unique concept in property valuation, and I have written out some things on the screen here to kind of explain how surrender and renewal works. So typically what happens is that there is a leaseholder who has held a lease of a property for a while and wants to secure some kind of favor from the leaseholder, and therefore is willing to surrender the remaining part of his lease. Maybe it may be a couple of years till the end of his lease, but he's saying, you know what, I will surrender that remaining part of my lease just to be able to get a favor from you. So that favor may include securing a longer lease. You don't want the uncertainty of what may happen at the end of the lease, and maybe the property owner says, I need to use my property, or I have found someone who will pay more. So you are saying, okay, take the rest of my lease and give me what I want. So if you look at my screen, I have written out some things. I said the typical situation is a tenant holding a lease with a relatively short unexpired term who wants the security of a longer term. So the agreement between the lessor and the lessee may vary, thus varying the kind of calculations to arrive at the wanted values. And then further down, there are three typical scenarios in which the surrender and renewal plays out. So the first one is that the tenant surrenders the existing lease and takes a new, longer lease at the same rent currently being paid. In exchange for retaining this favorable rent, the tenant pays a lump sum, which is the premium. We have done premium in a previous video. You can go and check on the YouTube channel and you'll find it there. And it pays a premium to the landlord at the commencement of the new lease. So the valuer's task now is to calculate the amount of this premium. Another scenario is where the tenant surrenders his existing lease and takes a new, longer lease without paying any premium. Instead, the landlord's compensation comes entirely through an increase in the annual rent. So yes, you have a secured lease, but now you have to pay a higher rent. And then the third one is that the tenant surrenders the existing lease and takes a new, longer lease on the condition that the tenant carries out specific capital works to improve the property at the tenant's expense. So the valuer's task is to calculate what the new rent should be, having regard to the increase in the property's full rental value resulting from the tenant's capital expenditure. So in this one, how the tenant secures this longer lease is that there's an agreement between the tenant and the landlord that you're going to carry out some capital project on this property. Capital projects may be changing the roof, maybe repainting the building, maybe putting tiles on the floor where there were no tiles, things like that. So let's now go and look at a typical example of how we calculate the surrender and renewal. This question says an existing lease has 4 years unexpired at a passing rent of 9 million naira per annum. The full rental value is 15 million naira per annum. A new 15-year lease is to be granted in its place at the same current rent of 9 million naira per annum. The freehold yield is 8%, leasehold remunerative rate 11%, ASF is 3%. So we're going to look at it from both the lessee's viewpoint and the lessor's viewpoint, and then try to strike a balance between both. So let's start from the lessee's viewpoint. And this is the present interest, right? We are going to propose the present, we're going to value the present interest as the interest that is currently running, right? So we have the full rental value, which is 15 million naira, and then the rent reserved, which is the rent paid, is 9 million naira. So we subtract that to get our profit rent. Remember that every time you are valuing the leaseholder's interest, what you are capitalizing is the profit rent, because that is the advantage that comes to the lessee. So what you're capitalizing is the profit rent. The profit rent is 6 million naira. Okay, and then we capitalize it using the YP 4 years. Remember, we are doing for the present interest, so 4 years at 11% and 3%, and that gives us 2.8649. We capitalize that and we get 17,189,400, and that's the capital value. So we now go ahead to value for the proposed interest. The proposed interest still for the lessee. So the proposed interest, we have FRV is still 15 million naira. Rent reserved, remember the question says that he intends to pay the same rent that he's enjoying now. So the rent reserved is still 9 million naira. So his profit rent will still be 6 million naira. Then we capitalize by YP 15 years, which is the new term he's hoping to secure, at 11% and 3%, and that gives us 6.1065. So when we capitalize that, it gives us 36,639,000. Okay, so we now subtract the present interest from the proposed interest, right? So we'll say proposed interest minus present interest is equal to the gain to the lessee. So in this case, that will be 36,639 minus 17 million I think I said 36,000. I meant 36 million. 36,639,000 minus 17,189,400, which will give us 19,449,600 naira. So this is the gain to the lessee if this transaction sails through. So now let's look at it from the lessor's viewpoint. And then we first do the present interest. Okay, and for the present interest, of course, we first do the term. So for the term, we have the rent reserved, which is the rent paid, and that is 9 million naira. And then we do YP 4 years at 8%. Okay, so we are using 8% because the question stated clearly here that the freehold yield is 8%. So YP 4 years at 8%, and that is 3.2121. So we capitalize that, and it gives us 29,808,900. Then we do the reversion to the full rental value, and then we have the FRV, which is 15 million, and then we capitalize it by the YP in PERP, deferred 4 years at 8%, which is 9.1875. Capitalize that, it gives us 137,812,500. So we add that to the term, we add the term and reversion together, and that gives us 167,621,400. So that is the present interest. So now let's look at the proposed interest. So for the proposed interest, we have the term. Under the term, we have the rent reserved, which is 9 million naira. That is what the tenant is proposing to pay. And then we capitalize that using YP 15 years, which is the proposed term, at 8%, and that gives us 8.5595, and multiplication of this gives us 77,035,500. Then we do for reversion. For reversion, we have the full rental value, which is 15 million naira, and then capitalize it using YP in PERP, deferred 15 years at 8%, and that gives us 3.94. Multiply that, and it gives us 59,100,000. We add both the term and reversion and it gives us 136,135,000 naira. All right, so once again we're looking for the gain to the lessor. So for the gain for the gain to the lessor, the present interest is higher than the proposed interest. The present interest is higher than the proposed interest. Okay, so we do present interest minus proposed interest is equal to gain to lessor. All right, which is equal to 167,621,400 minus 136,135,000, and that gives us 31,485,900. So this is what the premium should be from the lessor's viewpoint, and this is what the premium should be from the lessee's viewpoint. Okay, so usually it takes negotiation, and of course, whatever the stronger party or the person with the stronger argument usually would win. Okay, so it simply means that if it was the lessee that was offering, he would be offering in the region of 20 million naira, while the lessor will be demanding in the region of 30 million naira. It's possible for them to negotiate and find a common ground. So how about in a case where, so we're going to use the same details as the first question, but now there's no premium. It says, using the same property as in the question above, a new 15-year lease but no premium. The valuer must determine the rent that maintains the landlord's position. Okay, so there's going to be a new lease of 15 years, but there's going to be a new rent. It's not going to be in the first question, the rent was not supposed to change. In this question, the landlord is not taking a premium, so the rent is going to change. So now it's the task of the valuer to find out what is the appropriate rent that keeps the landlord in his advantageous position. And advantageous position simply means that at the end of the day, what he must be getting must be equal to the full rental value. Okay, so let's see, how do we work that out? So from the previous question, we've already ascertained that the present freehold value interest is 167,621,400, and the proposed, therefore we'll now do the proposed under this. Now remember, what we're looking for is the new rent. We don't know the rent, so we're going to look for the proposed interest for the freeholder, and then we start with the term. Okay, so for the proposed interest, we're looking for the term, we're looking for the rent reserved. That is what this question is about, so we don't know what it is, so we're going to put an X here. Okay, then we're going to capitalize that by YP 15 years at 8%. Remember, it's the freeholder's interest we are doing now, that's why we're doing term and reversion. So this gives us 8.5595. Okay, so when we capitalize that, that will give us 8.5595x. So this is the capital value for the term. So now we go on to do the proposed reversion. Proposed reversion. So we do full rental value is equal to 15 million naira. Then we do YP in per deferred 15 years at 8%, and that gives us 3.94. We capitalize that and it gives us 59,100,000. Okay, so we add the term and reversion together, and what it gives us is 59,100,000 plus 8.5595x. Right, so this is our total proposed freehold interest. Okay, now the question says that the landlord must remain in the same position, meaning he must not be worse off. This transaction must not put him at a disadvantage. So to do that, we'll say the present interest must be equal to the proposed interest. Okay, present interest must be equal to proposed interest. So therefore that means 59,100,000 plus 8.5595x must be equal to 167,621,400. So what that means is that 8.5595x is equal to 167,621,400 minus 100,000, and that will be equal to 108,521,400. So your x will now be equal to 108,521,400 divided by 8.5595. So our rent reserved, which is equal to x, is equal to 12,678,338. Okay, so we can say approximately 13 million naira. So if the landlord is going to enjoy being on the same level as if he was earning the FRV, after what he should be taking should be 13 million naira per annum. Okay, why is this less than the full rental value of 15 million? The reason is because he has already enjoyed that benefit of the remaining lease that is being surrendered to him, right? So it's almost like he has taken the income for the remaining 4 years as a lump sum, right? So that's like, it's almost like that's the premium, even though there's no premium. That remaining 4 years, which the tenant is not going to is not intending to use, is the premium to the landlord, and that's why the rent reserve is going to be a little lower than the full rental value. So I hope you understand that. So as usual, As usual, I'm going to leave you with a question that I want you to try out, and put your answers in the comment section so that I can help you review it. If you run into any problems while trying to work this out, please let me know in the comment section and I'll help you with it. Once again, I'd like to remind you, if you have not yet subscribed to this channel, kindly do so that you can get more valuation tips, and then like this video and please share with a friend. Thank you and see you in the next video.